Hey everybody, I'm Matt from the Creator team, and you're watching our weekly workshop. This week, I want to show you how to use Angular $HTTP to interact with any HTTP API that you'd like to use. Now, for today's specific example, we're going to create a simple survey application backed by a Google spreadsheet. And to do that, we're going to use a service called Sheetsu, which turns a Google spreadsheet directly into an API. So first, I want to get started by actually designing the application, and then we are going to interact with that API. We're just going to do a simple get all from the API and then post a new entry to the survey. In a later tutorial, I might show you how to use the same API to, for instance, do some queries on rows and things like that. But today, just want to show you how to get started using Angular HTTP. So the first thing we're going to do is create a new project, and I'm going to call this Survey App. And we are going to use a tabs-based project for this. So we just want to get started and make this look how we want it to look. So in the future, I'm imagining we're going to have 3 pages. We are most likely going to have the actual survey. For that, let's pull in like a list icon. Then we might have a results tab that can show all of the results. For that, let's maybe use a check mark. And then finally, maybe later on, we have a search tab that we can use to go and find specific survey results that we might want to look for. Now, just some visual things. I want to change this to positive. And then our overall header color for the entire app, I probably want to go change that to positive as well. So the first thing we are going to do after that is let's go rename these pages so they make some sense. This is survey. This is going to be results. And this is going to be search. Then what we can do is start to design our actual survey here. So let's add a paragraph of instructions here that's just going to say, fill out this form, and we will record your results. Okay, and we are going to drag over a form element. Let's kill that toggle. Let's move the input up one. And the first thing we're going to want to do is take the user's name. Then let's ask them for their favorite colors. So let's move over a select box here, name this favorite color, and add some options. So we can do, I don't know, green, orange, red, let's do pink, blue, black, and we'll just leave it at that. All right, so after favorite color, let's ask favorite pizza topping. And for that, we're going to want to use a radio button. We're going to give you 3 choices. Okay, so for this radio, the first one is going to be pepperoni, and the category is going to be topping. And what this category does is it lets us know that once we create 3 different radios, that those 3 are linked together by category. So let's duplicate pepperoni twice and change one of these to sausage and one of these to cheese. So we've got a simple survey here, name, favorite color, topping. We can add a submit button as well. Let's do submit, and let's make that button green. Okay, so now we've got our survey app kind of designed. And how that looks is we have our tabs at the bottom of the page with our simple survey asking name, color. This is going to come up as a native drop-down in your actual export, but since we're in the browser, it just looks like a normal select. And then pepperoni, sausage, or cheese, and you can only choose one of those. All right, so here's our design, but now we want to back this by an actual Angular HTTP API. So the first thing I'm going to do is go over to Google Drive, and this works for any API. Just for this one, we're going to back it by a spreadsheet. And I'm going to do new Google Sheets, and here we are going to name this survey results. And for this, we're going to do ID, name, favorite color, and favorite pizza. And let's put a dummy row in here. So we're going to have the ID of 1, name is Matt, favorite color is orange, favorite pizza is sausage, just so we can see what this looks like in our API. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to copy this URL for our actual Google spreadsheet. And then we're going to go to sheetsu.com. You can sign up for your own account and then go over to your APIs or use this form here. I'm just going to paste the URL for my Google spreadsheet, hit Create API, and now we get our nice little API URL that Sheetsu gives us. Okay. Now, if I copy this API URL and just open it in a new tab, what we see is we get that row in a list directly from our spreadsheet. So we've turned that spreadsheet into a URL that we can put in the browser and that we can use as an API. So the first thing we're going to want to do here is open up our code. And let's go over to services and start creating a survey service that we can interact with through multiple pages based on this API. I like using something that we're going to return to store data here. Just in case I need to call something from the return, I like to store that object in a separate variable. Now let's do this. Let's do var API URL is equal to the URL that Sheetsu gave us. Okay. And let's start to build something. So let's do the function all. We want this to return everything for our entire collection, okay? So the whole spreadsheet's data we want to get from all. So the first thing I want to do is I want to include two different things in the service. I want to include $Q and $HTTP. And you have to put both of those things both in the list as well as pass them to the function. So $Q, $HTTP. And Q gets us what's called a promise. And for lack of a very in-depth explanation, a promise is something you're going to use when a function takes some amount of indeterminate time to execute. So when you're going out and asking an API for some data, you don't want to actually return the function until you have the data back, which it has to go to the server, get the data, send it back to you, and we don't know how long that's going to take. It just happens at some point in time in the future. So we're going to do var deferred equals $Q dot defer. And then at the bottom of this function, we're going to return deferred.promise, okay? And in between, we're going to fire off that request using $HTTP. So this is going to be a really simple one for all. You see how we put that URL in, just regular URL, and it gave us everything? That's all we want to fire off here. So we want to use $HTTP.get. And a get is just a normal request that gets data from a specific URL. We're going to pass it our API URL. And then we're going to do .then function rest for response. And then we're going to do something, okay? So just like we're using a promise here with this defer, HTTP.get is also using a promise. So it's going to wait. When it's finished, we're going to get resp as a response of whatever that URL gave us, okay? So let's see here. What do we want to do? First of all, let's just see what that looks like. So let's console.log resp right here, right? And save our service. And then in our survey page, we can inject survey, which was the name of the service, okay? And do let's do survey.all, okay? So we are going to inject the survey service and just call that .all function from it, okay? So that .all is what we returned. We're going to call off this and console log what we get back. So when I preview our survey page, it should fire off that service and it should log in the console what that data is going to look like to us. So down here we can see we got an object back and we've got config, some headers, some status codes, all sorts of fun stuff. But .data is an array of that data straight from the spreadsheet where we got favorite color, orange, favorite pizza, sausage, ID 1, name Matt. So the actual list is in .data, response.data. Okay, so down in our code here, we can do a couple different things. Okay, we can do deferred.resolve resp.data. Okay, and what that does is we're just going to do that for now. So what this does is it's going to say, go tell this promise, okay, that we're now finished. We've resolved, and here's the data we got back. Okay, so now we're not going to actually use .all today, but what we did need it for is to figure out that ID column. So Sheetsu and Google Spreadsheets don't have like an overall ID, but an ID is something we might need in the future. So we want to, for instance, if we're adding this new survey result, we want the ID to be the next available ID. So let's do var current ID equals 0, okay? Just to store that so our service can use it. Then when we get this response back, we have all the rows. So we can do if response.data.length is greater than 0, So if there's any amount of data in here, okay, we can set current ID equal to parse integer resp.data resp.data.length minus 1.id. So we're getting the ID field of the last element in the collection. So we can store that to current ID and use it for an add function when we fill out the survey. I know that might be a little bit weird. Normally whatever API you're using is probably managing IDs for you. This specific way of using a Google spreadsheet just means we have to manage our own IDs. Okay. Now, in order to make sure that current ID is always valid, this service, I'm just going to have a call ret.all and fire that off immediately whenever the service is injected. So this is going to set that current ID for us, even if we don't call .all here, because just the second survey is injected, it's going to follow through and get that ID. All right. So now we can start rigging up our form to some data that we're going to send to the API to add a survey result to our spreadsheet. So we are going to start off by doing our standard scope.data equals an object. Name is nothing. Okay, favorite color. Let's set the default to orange. And favorite pizza, let's set the default to pepperoni. Okay. And let's start to rig up this data to our UI. So on name, we're going to add a directive. ngModel is going to be data.name. Okay. Favorite color, we are going to add just another simple ngModel here. So ngModel is equal to data.favorite_color. And then the pepperoni sausage cheese one gets a little bit different. We actually need two directives on each of these things. Okay, we're going to do ngModel is equal to data_favorite pizza. Okay, and we're going to add this to all three. Okay, so we're going to do ngModel data.favorite pizza, ngModel data.favorite pizza. Okay, but we need to tell it what actual value is associated with this radio. So we're going to add ngValue is equal to with quotes. The quotes are extremely important. Pepperoni. And we're going to add that to each one. So this is going to get ngValue is equal to sausage in quotes. And cheese is equal to ngValue cheese in quotes. Okay. So now this is rigged up to our actual data. So when we now preview, the name should be nothing. Favorite color should actually default to orange instead of green, and pepperoni should be checked immediately. So let's preview and see if we did everything right. All right, so name is nothing, favorite color defaulted to orange, and pepperoni defaulted to checked. So now we're all rigged up to that data. So now what we need to do is create a submit function, okay, that we use to send off our data to the API. So we're just going to do scope.submit equals function. And here I actually probably want to disable the submit button while we wait for the survey response to come back. So I'm going to create another scope variable here just called scope.submitting equals false. When we start the submit process, we can do scope.submitting equals true, right? Then we can do survey.add. Now we haven't created this .add function. We'll do that in just a second. Okay, and we will pass this .add function scope.data. Okay, and then it's a promise. So we'll do .then function. Okay, and after we've submitted our data here, we're going to want to reset the whole form. Okay, so we'll just reset that scope variable. We're going to want to set scope.submitting equal to false again because we're done submitting. And then maybe I want to show a pop-up that shows, okay, we've succeeded. So let's inject the $Ionic pop-up service. Go down here and do Ionic pop-up.alert. Okay, and if you want to look this up, $Ionic pop-up, Ionic 1 documentation shows us here that the show alert function here opens up a regular alert. That's all we need. So let's do Ionic pop-up alert here. Let's do title. Thank you. And let's do template. Your response has been recorded. All right. So that looks good to me, except this add function doesn't exist yet. So let's go back to our service, and let's make sure that we have an add function hooked up to this API. So add function data. Okay. Now this one, let's say maybe I don't know what API endpoint we're supposed to use for add, okay? We put our API URL in the browser and knew, okay, that responded with everything. So let's go to the Shitsu documentation here, and let's look up post. And a post is what is normally used to create a row. So Shitsu says it creates a row or rows given from this data. So you can see, here's a curl response here where they sent it to the main URL. So our main URL here, and they just passed it in the data, okay? So that's all we're going to do is we're going to do a post to our data URL with the information that we now want, okay? So we got to do a couple things here. First, let's set up our promise. Let's do return deferred .promise, okay? And then let's do $http.post, and yet again, we're just going to our standard URL, API URL, and let's pass it in the data that was passed to this function. Then, we wait for it to respond back, and here we do defer.resolve resp.data. Now, we do need to set up that ID field because we didn't pass it in an ID. So right here, I'm just going to set current ID ++. We're going to increment the ID to the next available ID and set data.id equal to current ID. Okay? So that's just setting up that ID field automatically so the user doesn't have to manage it. Our service manages everything. We post to the URL for our general API the data that was submitted from this form. We're going to wait for that data to respond. And after that data gets a response is when we set the data back to our blank values, set submitting to false, and set the Ionic pop-up alert. Okay. All right. Now we already rigged up the form, but we haven't rigged up the button yet. So on the button, we are going to add two different directives. ng submit is equal to submit with parentheses, but we also want ng disabled is set to submitting. So when submitting is true, this button will automatically get disabled. All right, so let's cross our fingers, preview this, and hope everything works. So we're going to do Joe, his favorite color is blue, and then his favorite type of pizza is cheese. We should see when I click this button, the button should disable. It'll wait a little bit of time while it goes to the API and posts our response, okay? And then the button will come back to enabled status, and we should get our pop-up. So submit. All right, and we failed a little bit. So let's see what I did wrong. All right. We have ng submit, ng disabled. Scope.submit is a function. Let's just try it again here. Cheese. Joe, his favorite color is blue. Submit. All right, let's inspect that. ng submit equal, oh, whoops. We're not in the button actually isn't in a form. Okay, so this button is outside of our form here. So we don't want ng submit, we want ng click. My bad. If we put the button in the form, ng submit would, for instance, work on enter like our last tutorial in the chat example. So let's do a preview here again. ng click should fire off that whole sequence of events. And actually, I left blank values. So blank values did just get entered into the database. If you want to do validation, you're going to have to set that up. So let's do Joe. His favorite color is blue. Favorite pizza is sausage. Submit that. Thank you. Your response has been recorded. And let's pull up our spreadsheet. So let's pull up the actual spreadsheet here. We can see there's one Matt orange sausage, one nobody orange pepperoni because we forgot to put in any values, two Joe blue sausage. Okay, now this one is slightly questionable because we already had something in here. So let's see here. We probably just want to go, and let me double check that code. I don't want to give you guys any false information here. Okay, current ID ++ data.id, parsing rest data length -1, so 1 minus 0.id, deferred current ID. Let's just set that to 1, make sure that doesn't screw up. All right, so let's preview this. Let's add another row here. Testing. Let's go to red, cheese, submit. And while that's working, we can go look here. 3 test. Okay, so it is working appropriately. We got 1, 2, 3. We're going up and incrementing our values here. Okay, So now that we've done that, we can see that if we just look at that get URL and refresh again, we get all of our responses in there. Okay, so we've done two things so far. We've done a .all function, which sets up our IDs, gets the entirety of the database from the spreadsheet. And then we got our .add function, which adds something to the actual spreadsheet. Now, if you're just creating a survey app to collect those responses and you want to look at them later in your, in your Google spreadsheet, that's fine. You're done now. I think in maybe next week's tutorial, we're going to go through and work on those other tabs. So we're going to work through the results tab and the search tab. But for right now, this kind of gives you a great starting point for $HTTP. Okay, so all you do is we pass the URL to post, to get, to wherever. Now, like I said, if you pull up the documentation for Shitsu, you might see like, okay, if you want to update a row, it uses a different URL. So for something like that, if you want to get an early head start on maybe the next tutorial, you just, you would add something to this URL, like, slash the column, slash the value, and that would do an update if you changed post to whatever it wants for this URL, which is actually a put. Okay, so as you're working through, $HTTP is very easy to use. You can look up Angular $HTTP on Google to find their official documentation, but it's pretty straightforward. So, okay, today we looked at the APIs, Ionic Pop-Up, Shitsu, Google Spreadsheets. We got that all working in a survey application. I look forward to chatting with you guys next week. Catch you then. Peace.